Hello and welcome along to a brand new episode of Aviation Analysis, the channel that brings you the most intriguing, bizarre and phenomenal tales from the skies. When discussing aviation tragedies which have resulted in a massive loss of life, we tend to imagine an unfortunate mid-air collision, aerial conflict or a catastrophic crash. These are typical outcomes that are not only shocking, but tend to teach us lessons with regards to technology, modern warfare and counter-terrorism protocols in the hope of saving lives in the future. However, there are some stories that are just too strange to comprehend and decipher, where transcripts reveal a deep sense of confusion on board an aeroplane and when so many people unnecessarily and mysteriously lose their lives. On the 19th of August 1980, what has become known as one of the deadliest disasters in aviation history occurred after a passenger aircraft landed at Riyadh International Airport in Saudi Arabia's capital. A Lockheed L-1011 Tristar plane had to make an emergency landing due to an in-flight fire not long after taking off. However, after the plane came to a halt, nothing happened and all went quiet before tragedy struck. In the end, 301 people would lose their lives on a flight that landed safely on the ground, sparking all sorts of conspiracy theories and demands for answers. So what happened that day that has left us with more questions than answers? What does the transcript tell us about the mindset of those in the cockpit? Who was responsible and what did the subsequent investigations find? Join us on this episode of Aviation Analysis as we attempt to find the truth regarding the strange case of Saudi Flight 163. Before we delve into the mystery surrounding the flight, let us first get to know a little bit more about the planned route, the aircraft itself, and those piloting it. Names who will forever be part of the headlines and conspiracy theorist discussions. Saudi Flight 163 was a regular scheduled flight from Karachi, Pakistan to Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, with a stopover in Riyadh, operated by Saudi Arabia's national airline using a wide-body Lockheed L-1011 Tristar. The L-1011 is an American medium to long-range wide-body trijet airliner built by the Lockheed Corporation and was the third wide-body airliner to conduct commercial flights after the Boeing 747 and the McDonnell Douglas DC-10. The Tristar has a seating capacity of up to 400 passengers and a range of over 4,000 nautical miles and contains 3 Rolls-Royce RB211 engines with one engine under each wing, along with the third engine located in the tail and the upper fuselage. Before disaster struck at Riyadh International Airport runway, all seemed to be fine as the first leg of the journey from Karachi to Riyadh went without a hitch. While stationed at Riyadh Airport, all 287 passengers and 14 crew members boarded with the intention of reaching their destination of Jeddah on the second leg of the plane's flight path. It is recorded that many of the crew and approximately half of the passengers were Saudi nationals. 85 passengers went from Pakistan and the remaining 32 were Iranian. It is believed that the majority of the passengers were travelling to Jeddah to take part in the Hajj, an annual Islamic pilgrimage to Mecca in Saudi Arabia, which is considered to be the holiest city for Muslims. Hajj, in Islamic terminology, is a pilgrimage made to Kaaba, the House of Allah, in the sacred city of Mecca in Saudi Arabia. Flying the doomed aircraft was Captain Mohammed Ali Kautia, 38, an experienced pilot who had been with Saudi since 1965 but had only 388 hours flying time on the L-1011 model. According to reports, Kautia did not do so well in training. Flight instructors commented that he, quote, had difficulty when requested to vary from a set pattern and was, quote, slow to learn. Alongside the struggling captain was First Officer Sami Abdullah Hassanain, 26. Hassanain had only 2 years flying experience behind him, with only 125 hours on the Tristar. Again, history did not serve him well, as in 1975 he had been disqualified from a pilot training program due to poor progress. Flight engineer Bradley Curtis, 42, a US citizen, was also a part of the crew and had been employed by Saudi since 1974, but again, had only been certified on the L-1011 for a couple of months, racking up a mere 157 hours on the Tristar. Curtis also suffered from dyslexia and had previously dropped out of captain training on the Boeing 737 aircraft. The fact that all three crew members had insufficient flight time on the L-1011 model and had previous issues with training or understanding the various techniques and mechanics to operate such an aircraft effectively is worrying. Could this have been to blame for the tragic events that would occur? Let us now investigate the events of the day as they occurred. At 18:32 Pakistan time on the 19th of August 1980, Flight 163 took to the skies, having departed Quaid-e-Azam International Airport, now Jinnah International Airport in Karachi, with the full intention of meeting its eventual flight path towards Kandahar Airport in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. The scheduled stopover in Riyadh Airport went without a hitch. The plane landed and refueled, but was scheduled for a 2-hour layover where passengers were able to get off the plane. Once the aircraft was refueled and ready to go, all checks were confirmed and the flight set off at 18:08 UTC toward Jeddah. Unfortunately, they would never make it to the Holy City. A mere 7 minutes into the journey, a smoke warning was indicated to the crew, which was seemingly emitting from the plane's cargo area. The cockpit voice recorder transcripts capture the moment and timestamps of the initial warning. What's going on? Smoke detection, B aft cargo. Over the course of the next 4 minutes, the apparent confusion turned to speculation and difficulty in trying to ascertain the warnings and their reality. There is a lot of back and forth discussion from the crew before flight engineer Curtis decides to go to the cabin to confirm for himself. After confirming that there was indeed smoke present in the area of the plane, Captain Kautier decided to return to Riyadh Airport. First Officer Hassanain is captured on the cockpit voice recorder, authenticating their decision to radio in the danger. 18.163. We're coming back to Riyadh. I would declare an emergency. Yeah. The seriousness of the situation was now beginning to manifest, as a few minutes later, the thrust lever for number 2 engine, which was positioned in the centre, became blocked due to the fire expanding and burning through the operating cable. At 18:29, the plane was heading towards the airport runway, and so the engine was shut down on final approach. At 18:35, Kautier officially declared the emergency and the plane landed back at Riyadh as safely as possible. The transcript recalls. Copied today. Passenger announcement. Everybody please sit down. Everything's under control. We are landing back at Riyadh. Please sit down and fasten your seatbelts. Sit down and fasten your seatbelts, please. Ladies and gentlemen, no need to panic. Place your hands behind your head for impact position. Urdu. This is when things turn sinister, as upon landing the aircraft, the final distances of approach are announced, but at 18:36 and 7 seconds, Captain Kautier says something very strange and baffling. Looking good. Tell them to not evacuate. No need for that, we are okay, no problem. Minimum. 100. Loud squeal begins and continues until the end of the cockpit voice recorder tape. 50, 40, 30. Loud squeal. End of cockpit voice recorder tape. 18:36 and 30 seconds. Approximate time of landing. By now, Flight 163 had landed and proceeded to a taxiway near the end of the runway, finally coming to a halt at 18:39, a full 2 minutes and 40 seconds after touchdown. This was surprising to all personnel involved on the ground, as the airport had already deployed their fire rescue teams and positioned them at the other end of the runway. This would have been normal procedure on their part, especially due to the expectant emergency stop and evacuation. In any case, once the plane had finally come to a halt, it appeared that the crew were proceeding to power down the engines and begin the evacuation process. However, when the rescue teams arrived, they reported that the 2 wing-mounted engines were still running, thus preventing them from opening the doors. Eventually, the engines were shut down at 18:42, 3 minutes and 15 seconds after the aircraft came to a stop. It was then that all communication from within the cockpit and fire rescue teams was lost. It is noted that fire could be seen through the windows of the aircraft, yet nothing was being done to ensure safe evacuation of those on board. Shockingly, it would take 23 minutes before the R2 door would be opened after the engines were powered off. In a desperate attempt to gain access and locate the passengers, fire crews prized the doors open and began to search. This would be in vain, as the tragedy would strike a few minutes later. At 19:08, the interior of the aircraft suffered a massive flashover of fire, completely consuming everything and everyone within its confines and forcing the firefighters to retreat. No one would survive. The mystery surrounding Flight 163 remains to this very day, with more questions being posed than answers. Many have questioned the crew's professionalism, reaction time, and inability or refusal to prioritize the safe evacuation of the passengers on board. Questions were also asked as to why the plane proceeded to the opposite end of the runway upon landing. Saudi reports claim that Captain Coitier and his crew were unable to prise the plug-type doors open in time, and that it was presumed many of the passengers on board were impaired or unconscious during the landing roll. Another important note from the investigations that followed was that the cabin pressurization system was on standby, and so both pressurization hatches were completely closed. The pressurization hatches should have opened completely on touchdown to depressurize the aircraft. How could such a catastrophe have occurred? Let us dig deeper into the subsequent examinations and eyewitness accounts that led to changes in the aviation sector as a whole. It is reported that the bodies of all the crew members were still in their seats. The passengers were all located within the forward section of the fuselage. Autopsies were carried out on non-Saudi nationals, and it was concluded that they had died from smoke inhalation. The firefighters themselves were also at a disadvantage, as those employed at the Riyadh International Airport had never fought an aircraft fire before, especially a model as large as the Lockheed L-1011. A first-hand account of the stress and toll that the disaster took on those trying to save the souls inside was published by Kenneth R. Strange, a New York-based writer and former FBI agent. In one of his articles, Strange discusses his chance meeting with a pair of fellow Americans from the Midwest, named only as Kevin the supervisor and Rob his assistant. Both men had been part of the Crash Fire and Rescue CFR team at the airport that evening and recalled their feelings about the events that unfolded. Kevin from Kansas stated that, "It was absolutely horrible. We got the alarm that one of the Saudi flights was in trouble and returning to the airport. When we got there, one of my crew screamed over the engines that he could see a fire in the aft section of the plane. He became visibly shaken and upset by saying, 'I cannot imagine what those poor people were going through,' before revealing, 'What I remember most that night were two things. We frantically worked to open the door. We knew people were dying inside. When I put my gloved hands to the door, I felt a searing heat unlike anything I'd ever felt. The palms of my gloves almost melted away.' The conversation concluded with Kevin becoming extremely upset when describing what he saw inside. About 3 minutes after the team finally popped open one of the doors, a flash fire ripped through and incinerated the plane's roof. We abandoned efforts to extricate the passengers and crew. We were now hosing down the plane, trying to extinguish the blaze. When we opened the door, we first saw the bodies of the flight crew, the women so small, under a pile of bodies with the passengers on top of them, up to the roof." Going back to the investigation that followed the tragedy, it was confirmed that the fire had started in the aft C3 cargo compartment. Its blaze so fierce that it was able to burn through the cabin's floor, forcing the passengers into the forward area before landing. Saudi officials also found 2 butane stoves in remains of the aircraft, thus leading to a theory that a passenger used his own butane stove to heat water for a cup of tea. However, much like the other theories to stem from the disaster, including religious motives, terror-related attacks and/or airline sabotage, the investigations found no sufficient evidence to support them. There was a swift reaction and amendments to aviation policy after the event, however, with the airline overseeing and revising its training and emergency procedures. Lockheed removed insulation from above the rear cargo area and added glass to laminate structural reinforcement for better protection, and the US National Transportation Safety Board recommended that aircraft use halomethane extinguishers instead of traditional handheld fire extinguishers to effectively tackle onboard fires. Crew resource management was a key motive for change in the aftermath of Flight 163, as it became clear that the communication within the cabin and to the emergency services on the ground was central to the lack of evacuation procedures. It was said that, in high-power distance cultures, juniors do not question superiors, and leaders may be autocratic, leading to situations where a first officer finds it difficult to question decisions made by the captain. This breakdown of communication may have been the primary cause for the deaths of all 301 people that day. Or could it have been something more ominous, or even supernatural? Unfortunately, the theories continue to spread to this very day. And so we come to the end of another episode, folks. We hope this sheds some light on what happened to Flight 163 and provides one with a moment of pause to remember those who perished that day. Despite the need for answers and mystery surrounding the events, one lesson that we can all take away from this tragedy is that you never know what is around the corner. Just when you think you are safe, disaster can strike. So stay safe out there, folks, and join us next time for another episode of Aviation Analysis.